Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to another surprise episode. I say surprise for those of you who are watching live episode of the Church Revitalization Podcast live. We're back live this week, which we've been doing some recorded stuff the last couple of weeks, mainly because we've been hitting some heavy topics, AJ. Some topics regarding racial injustice and how churches can manage that. We talked last week. We were talking with Greg Atkinson about how to not leave your online audience behind as you move back to in-person services. And we're going to piggyback off that topic today, AJ, and talk about this idea of doing ministry in the messy middle. We are in this weird phase of life where it's like things are open and they're not open, and people are going out, but they're not going out. And it can make ministry really difficult. And so AJ and I, like many of you, have started to get back to work. We never quit being at work, so to speak, but we had quit traveling, and we're back on the road now largely, and we're getting to see how churches are responding to things and how communities are responding to things. We want to reflect on what we're seeing and what we think is necessary to lead well and manage ministry in the messy middle.
Yeah. It's been interesting, hasn't it, Scott? So we've been just a couple places in the last couple weeks. I've been to Florida, and you've been to Minnesota. And I live in Texas. You live in Tennessee. So we've got at least 4 points of location that we've kind of
and I've been
the world.
Went to Pennsylvania and Ohio as well. And then also went on vacation in South Carolina. So I've been in handful of states. In the last couple
weeks. And we both
weeks.
Experienced Charlotte Airport together. So
that's true.
We got to see what that's like as well. Talk about the messy middle. Yeah, going to an airport and trying to figure out what's happening there.
Yeah,
it's been interesting getting out into the world, and so
when I head to California on Friday, and I'm gotta tell you, I think that's one that I'm not nervous isn't the right word, but I think is going to be sort of a vastly different experience from Minnesota or Ohio or Pennsylvania or South Carolina or Tennessee. California is, as always, a unique place. So I'm interested to see what that's going to be like.
But we've seen definitely some different things, right? I mean, we're experiencing people just like we have in churches. I mean, some people don't really care about anything. And they're just going about their lives as if there's nothing going on around them. And then other people that are really, really frightened. And, I mean, they're masked and gloved and all kinds of things going on. And so that's been kind of interesting. I mean, for me, I was doing some unofficial scientific counting while I was traveling, and almost always was finding 30% of the people wearing masks. Every time I would, just look at a group of people waiting at an airport or in some little, some queue somewhere, and count up 10, and there would be 3 with masks on. So I don't know what you were finding as far as that went in the places that you've been.
I think that honestly, masks are one of those things that are going up. I think there's been more masking lately. I think that people have started to get out more, just in general, and so they're going, all right, if I'm going to be out, probably I should wear a mask. And so more places are requiring it, more people are wearing them. Really counter to my intuition was that people are not going to go along with this. I think people are starting to go along with it because they see it as a much more viable alternative to just staying home. People are going, I'm not going to stay home. So a lot of the folks who maybe would have stayed home before are getting out, but they're masking up. So that's increasing the number of people who are masking up. Whereas like 4 weeks ago, the people who were out were people who they're still not they weren't masking 4 weeks ago, and they're still not masking, but now there's just more people who are masking out. I don't know if that makes any sense. But yeah, that leads to really we wanted to make a couple of observations. So even though every location is different, your mileage may vary. in terms of what the attitudes and things are like in your particular location. We've been out and traveled enough places to identify 3 themes, and they're things that you're likely seeing in your own community, and then kind of what does that mean for your church, and how can you lead well and do ministry in this messy middle. So the first thing, AJ, we want to talk about is how we've noticed that things are mostly open for the most part. I mean, you go to even more liberal states like Minnesota, there's still almost everything is open. Restaurants are open. You can go sit inside a restaurant in Minnesota, even in the Minneapolis area there. You can sit inside and eat a meal inside. So things for the most part are open. Churches are starting to reopen. Again, even in those more liberal states, things are mostly open. So what does that mean for churches? If things are mostly open, what's the implication?
Yeah, well, I think it's fairly safe to sort of go, in this case, for the church to sort of go along with what the world is doing, because it's still people going places. I mean, we don't need to necessarily go too deep theologically on anything. I mean, if it's generally okay for people to gather, then it's generally okay for people to gather at a church. Now, of course, there's a big difference between a church and a lot of other businesses in which the quantity of people in a space is much different in a lot of churches. So Again, your mileage may vary because it depends on how big your worship center is, your sanctuary, and even pre-COVID, what your density was in there. I mean, maybe you could sit 300, but you've only got a 100-member church, or maybe you can sit 2,000 and you pack it out, 3 services every Sunday. So it just sort of depends. But of course, there's ways, to deal with that, of decreasing your density so that you're creating an environment that maybe is more like going to Home Depot, in which, it's pretty easy to stay away from people. I mean, there might be 200 people in the store, but you can pass by, turning away from folks, I suppose, and not breathing each other's air too much. Then, of course, there's the whole singing thing as well, Scott, that comes up. I was at a church recently, and they decided to sing that Simon and Garfunkel song that was written in the key of COVID.
The key of COVID? What's the key of COVID?
Yeah,
What's that song?
You don't know the Simon and Garfunkel song written in the key of COVID?
No, I'm not familiar with the key of COVID or that Simon and Garfunkel song.
Well, it was The Sound of Silence.
Oh, The Sound of Silence. Oh, I know it was just Father's Day, but that was pretty bad, AJ.
But so anyway, there are certainly churches though that are choosing not to sing. Some are singing with masks, some are not singing at all. So there's just a lot of choices still being made. And I don't think we could say there's one right thing for every church everywhere. There's just a lot of context involved. Mm-hmm. And so there's, I think it's just, we've got to get a general feel for what's happening in our local environment, and then depending on our church situation, make some of these decisions moving forward. But by and large, we are seeing things are opening up.
So the point here we want to make is, since things are open mostly, there's really not an excuse at this point for your church not to begin planning that reopening. So I know there have been a lot of churches I've worked with personally, that are just very nervous about opening that up. And there should be a way to do it safely depending on what your context is. So don't take that as authoritative. And as AJ said, if you're a large church and you were packing out 3 services, and you seat 2,000 and you've got capacity for 2,500, you probably can't open up because you're not going to go from 3 services to 10 to be able to accommodate, right? So that's not going to be possible for you. But if the average church should be able to open up safely. And so it's time to maybe start ripping off that Band-Aid or thinking about it. And like, jokes aside about the song, the Sound of Silence, you may not sing at first because it is one of the riskier things. So I guess we want to say there's going to come a point, and that point will probably be in July or August, where people in your church are going to start to start scratching their heads if you're not reopening, or at least not explaining what your plan is for reopening. Because people are going to go, wait a minute, I can go to this, and I can do this thing, and I can go here, and I can do it safely. I can wear a mask, I can this and that and the other thing, but I can't go to church. And so if you're not communicating what your plan is, and soon, that's going to start to be problematic. So, in fact, one church I was speaking with recently, they were going through this exact thing. They're still not quite ready to open up, which is totally legitimate, but they hadn't really communicated what their plan was. And so they were starting to get some of that frustration from people in the church, just saying, just tell us what your plan is. Are we looking at a month, 3 months, 2 months, 6 months? What's the plan? So be sure you're communicating what your plan is, and be sure you have a plan.
Yeah. Yep. So along that line, our next point here is that people really don't want to be in crowds yet, at least in crowds where they're very close together.
This is the irony, right? Like, we just said, hey, you really should open. And then on the other hand, people don't want to be in crowds. And both things are true.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. They want things open, and they also don't want to be in a crowd. Sorry. Keep going.
It's that density management. I mean, that's really it. If you've got a lot of room and people can spread out, then that works well. And in other cases, I mean, there's people aren't ready probably to be filling football stadiums and other things happening. So, not that football would be happening right now anyway. Even I know that, Scott. Even I know it's not normally football season.
Yeah. And for those listening, AJ is not a football fan. I mean, I kind of made this joke earlier to AJ, but before we went on air. But if Trump can't fill a stadium right now, nobody can. Right? I mean, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, if Trump in Tulsa, Oklahoma can't fill a stadium full of people, that means it's people are not wanting to do that quite yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't believe that, and you go, wait, I'm not trying to be political, I'm just making a statement of fact. Go online and look at what crowds are like at Universal Studios in Florida. Like the crowds are low. People are. That is just not an environment that people are super anxious. Some people are, but the vast majority of people are not super anxious to get into that environment. And again, you might be thinking, wait a minute, didn't I just see all these mass protests on the news, and there were literally tens of thousands of people, and the answer to that is yes. But if you add up all the people across the country who were involved in a protest, especially one that was crowded, it probably would be like less than half of 1% of the entire United States population was involved in something like that. So that means that 99.5% of Americans just are not hopping ready to get into some sort of a crowded space, by and large. It's just a thing that people are nervous about for relatively good reason. It's just not that. So to your point, AJ, you have to manage that density, the density, and the felt density, because people, it's. We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, AJ. There's the PR side of things, and then the medical side of things. There's a real medical risk, but there's also the way that people feel. So if it feels crowded, then it is crowded, even if there's 6 feet of space. I don't know. Can you think of an example recently when you've been out and about where even though there probably was plenty of space between people, it felt like this is probably too many people in one area?
Well, I mean, I look at even the grocery store. I mean, our grocery stores they've been just doing seemingly fine. People seem okay passing each other in the aisle and, going around one another, kind of normal behavior in the aisles. But whenever you get in line, they're not on top of each other in line. Like if you're going to be in this one static place, you just want to leave that distance. Moving is okay. But standing still or sitting or doing anything else, I think that it feels different. And to some extent, it actually is different. If you're going to be in that air space for a prolonged period of time, that's different than just moving about. I think that's why, Home Depot is packed every time I go, but it's a big store and you can move around. It's no big deal. The parking lot looks like nothing has ever changed or ever happened. But you can go in the store, move around, pick up whatever you need, and everything is cool. So I think that may be kind of the difference between things.
I was just thinking about the difference when getting on an airplane. When you used to be, a whole 6 months ago, when you'd be waiting right before you're about to board, everybody would pack in around the gate, waiting for their group number to be called or whatever, or their zone or whatever kind of.
Times the gate agents say, "Please keep the boarding lane clear until your group."
That's
is
right.
called. Yeah.
They would pack in like sardines. And the irony of it is, when you get on the plane, you are kind of packed in like sardines, and yet people don't want to be packed in that close when they're in the airport at the gate. They have people spread out. I've also noticed, now they kind of instruct you to do this on the plane, but I don't think they would even have to. Used to be the second the unbuckle your seatbelt sign would come up, everybody stands up and gets in the aisle waiting to get out.
Yeah.
People don't. I mean, some, like maybe 10% of people will get up, but most people stay seated, and they're waiting for that door to actually be open, and they kind of let the people in front of them go. So, ironically, planes kind of deplane faster because people are doing what they always should have been doing.
I was shocked to see that.
Yeah, because people don't want to get right up on something.
Because they said, they told you don't get up. And when it came to my row, I got up and I looked back, and it was freaky to look at a plane seated behind me. I've never seen it before. So
and I don't think they would even need to tell you that. I think they would just do it naturally, because they don't want to stand in an aisle right up next to somebody like that.
Yeah.
At any rate, so all that to say, when it comes to your church, you need to be thinking about where are those spots that people could kind of clog up, and it makes people feel very uncomfortable. And manage that. At the same time, this is the other point we wanted to make here, AJ, is that the reason why people came to church is they want to have that social interaction.
Yeah.
They didn't come I'm sure you're a great preacher, but they did not come just to hear you speak live. Because they could do that at home. They could watch your recording at home. So if the only thing you're offering at your church in a live experience is the opportunity to hear you speak live, and you become so obsessed with managing the density situation that you're dismissing by row. People are kind of coming in, sitting, listening to music. They may or may not be singing. They may or may not be wearing a mask. They hear you speak, and then you dismiss them by row, and they get in their car and they leave. That is not an experience that most people want to have. And so, while on the one hand,
I wonder if a couple months from now we might be experiencing some in-person fatigue if church is so different and lacks so many of the elements that people just thrive on.
Yeah.
If they'd be like, well, this hasn't been much better than Zoom. So.
Well, this has been the argument that especially large churches have made, is that if our in-person experience can't be at least as good as our online experience, then we're not going to do an in-person experience. Yeah. But my counterpoint to that would be, find a way to make your in-person experience a sociable experience that's still a safe one. So I've had the chance to work now with a few different churches in person, and what's so interesting is oftentimes our meeting with, and it's always a small group. Please, no one report me to some health human services department. It's always 10 people or so in a meeting. But oftentimes it's the first meeting they've had in person with each other. And they don't hug each other or anything like that, but they do. They're so excited to see one another in person and have a conversation, and to do that safely. So if you can do what you can to make those kinds of conversations safe. Make outside a very attractive place, assuming you're in a place with decent weather and it's not 120 degrees outside or raining or something. Make outside an attractive place to have conversations. What if you were to set up little tables outside, bistro, counter height type tables? Mm-hmm. What could you do to make outside an attractive place to have social conversations at a safe distance from one another? All the science says the being outside and having conversation is not very dangerous at all. So how could you encourage that kind of socialization to happen? Because people want that socializing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and same thing with your small groups, home groups. There's really no reason at this point that, a group of 10 people in any one person's house probably can get away from each other enough and be able to maybe recapture some of that small group experience that your church may have been thriving on for years. But some churches they've been waiting on that too. It seems like Sunday morning is what the focus has been. When can we start Sunday morning back up? But there may be other ways that you can get people interacting with one another again, manage the safety of it, and really fulfill an emotional need that people have that a sterile Sunday morning might not fulfill.
Yeah, another thing to think about with small groups, because I kind of get it. This is just me personally. Nervous about I can't control the cleanliness level of a person's house. So I don't know what kind of cleaning they've done. But encourage outside small groups. Do backyard small groups and do those things around fire pits and barbecues and or bring your own dinner, bring your own lunch or whatever. Like find ways to do safe things outside together. I don't think you can find anybody along the political spectrum at this point who doesn't think that doing outside things with other humans is unsafe, by and large. So find ways to do that. So just to recap so far, we got one more point, but things are open mostly. So if you've not communicated any plan for reopening, you need to do that soon, just so that people know where you stand and what your plan is. At this point, people expect you to have some sort of a plan. Secondly, people don't like to be in crowds, so you do need to manage that density, and at the same time, both the reality of it and the perception of it. So you want to make sure that things don't feel crowded, even if they aren't actually crowded. And then the second point to that is you got to create ways to encourage socializing in ways that are safe, and outside is the best way to do that. So if you live in a hot place like Arizona, I know I can already hear it. People are like, we live in Arizona, it's 120 degrees outside. Get some tents. Like, do something. Like, get some shade. Find some ways to give some shade that it's still kind of outside. Find ways to make this happen because people need it. All right, what's the third thing we're seeing, AJ?
Yeah, finally, digital fatigue is a real thing. So I know we were just going gangbusters through March and April, and everybody was excited. They were getting it all figured out. But attendance online, we're seeing dropping off in a lot of churches that were once really strong.
If I hear the two words "new normal" one more time, I might just flip my desk.
Yeah.
Humans' DNA has not fundamentally changed in 4 months.
Yeah. People
still want human interaction, not just and I've said it for months. Digital meetings, Zoom meetings are the turkey bacon of meetings. Like it gets the job done, but it is not the real thing, and people know that.
Yeah. So we can't depend on that. We can't now. Not to say, and we talked about this last week.
Yeah.
Do not abandon your digital experience online.
No.
We just can't do that. That has to remain an option for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's some people that don't want to come back yet. There's some people that can't come back yet. And we've got to remain there for them. In addition to folks that just, have just discovered your church. Maybe they just moved to the area. Maybe for some reason, all of a sudden, they're just maybe interested in getting connected in church or learning what this whole Jesus thing is all about. We've got to have ways for them to get to know you and to be able to connect with you and interact. So digital is not going away. Online church, online groups, none of that should go away. But people do they just get tired of it as the only way to connect. And so as you come back together, don't drop that stuff, but you can also expect that people will not be satisfied with that long term.
Here's one of the ironies.
These are things that have to be managed.
One of the ironies, AJ, is that you have people who are not ready to come back in person yet. They're just not. They're not there. And at the same time, they are also not, just because they're not ready to come back in person doesn't mean that they are also going to tune in every week online or engage in a group. And so you genuinely have some people who are starting to sort of fall off. They're just falling off. And so back in March and in April, when everybody was online, churches were doing a great job of following up with individual people. They were emailing them, texting them, calling them. And churches have stopped doing that because now that we have the in-person option, people have sort of gone, well, they're either going to tune in online or they're going to come in person. Well, if you've been tracking like you're supposed to, doing some sort of an Eventbrite pre-registration, or through some other system you're doing pre-registration, you know who has come to an in-person service and who hasn't. And all those people who are part of your church who have not yet signed up for an in-person gathering, that means they're still allegedly tuning in online, but they may not actually be. I guess I'm just encouraging you to please follow up with these people. Find out how they're doing. Don't assume that just because they're not ready to come back to an in-person service yet, that they're actually still tuning in online. They may have walked away from all that, and that's not a good thing. So we have to continue to follow up with those folks.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that one-on-one contact, I think, would just go a long way. And that's, for you smaller church folks, that's not hard to do. And larger churches usually have maybe a small group or maybe still a Sunday school thing going on. And, that's just a great thing for those small group leaders or Sunday school leaders to be doing as well, to be responsible just for a smaller group of people and be able to make that personal contact. And that's just going to go a long way for these people, maybe this new category of church member that they're not online and they're not in person. Maybe they're online once a month, twice a month, and just not ready to not wanting to come back and be that March, April, every Sunday thing whenever that's all we had and it was new and the newness of the living room has worn off. It's not a fun novelty anymore to watch church in your pajamas and drink coffee.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's recap. So we've been out and about probably more than the average person has, and we've noticed a few things. First thing we've noticed is that things are mostly open. So if you don't have a plan for reopening yet, you may already be open, but for those of you that haven't opened yet, you need to communicate what your plan is and do that quickly. I know that some of you might be listening to that thinking, that's crazy. Every church has a plan that they've talked about. Trust me, that's not true. There are churches that still don't have a plan or at least have not communicated it. But that needs to happen. Number two, people don't like crowds. So you need to manage that population density and at the same time giving people outlets for socialization and socializing. When it comes, and including on Sunday morning, so make outside attractive, encourage outside interactions. I love the idea of doing small groups in backyards, or even host them. If you've got a big, nice campus, you could do them outside at your campus. Set up a fire pit or something at your campus, and have folks be able to use that space. And number three, people overstate how much they love online meetings. The digital fatigue is real. It really is. The digital fatigue is real, and so we can't assume that just because someone isn't ready to come back to an in-person service means that they're still watching online. They may have walked away from all of that, and so they need that life-on-life communication. They need you to call them, to text them, to send them a postcard, to do something to check in with them and make sure that they're still alive and they're still doing okay. So don't neglect some of those good things that you started back in March and April, both in terms of good online content, but also good just ministry practice of engaging people. Don't abandon those things right now. Keep them going. Any closing thoughts, AJ, you want to add to all that?
No, I think that's some good points for this week. So thanks for a great topic today, Scott, again. This has been episode 44 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're thankful that you tuned in. And with the show notes for this week will be up on our website tomorrow at malfersgroup.com/44, just the number 44. And you can catch a rerun of this on Facebook or YouTube on our channel there. And we'll be looking forward to having you back next week.